Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Roberta Nassa. I'm a biomedical engineer, and I work at the IRCS Junior Media in Italy, which is a pediatric rehabilitation center. And today I will chair this webinar organized by EPTRI. EPTRI is a distributed research infrastructure that offers high-quality services in basic, preclinical, and translational pediatric research. EPTRI is composed of 5 thematic research platforms, and it is structured to enhance technology-driven pediatric research in drug discovery and early pediatric medicines development phases by providing expertise, facilities, and methodologies focused on basic research for pediatric medicine discovery. Its mission is based on recognizing the importance of growth and ontogeny characteristics in pediatric drug and device response, and the integration of preclinical and clinical research. This fifth webinar is organized within the one-year educational program set by the EPTRI Paediatric Medical Devices Platform. During this webinar, we will delve into the strategies and benefits of design partnerships and how to bring different stakeholders such as the national health systems, academia, and biotech companies together. Our first speaker is Gemma Wheeler. Gemma is a project manager at the National Institute for Health and Care Research, Health Tech Research Center in Pediatrics and Child Health. In her current role, Gemma supports projects and teams to adopt meaningful approaches to involving children, young people, and their families in research and innovation. She also designs and delivers doctoral and postdoctoral training programs in co-design and leads the organizing committee for the Global Child Health Technology Conference annually. Gemma today will talk about her network and the lessons learned in the last 5 years from trying to do participatory work within the UK National Health System, and how to move forward, and the challenges regarding inclusivity and diversity, and how to address that in the future. Then the second speaker of the webinar is Ursula Ankeny. She's a design researcher and a PhD student and at the Lab for Living at the Sheffield Hallam University in UK. Ursula is working in design technology in health to create a meaningful solution for condition-specific challenges. Her background is in product design, and she uses the design and making of objects to translate and trial different concepts in a 3D medium, with co-design be central to her approach. Ursula's work ranges from medical devices and wearable technologies to condition-specific resource specs and service design. Today, Ursula will cover the topic of informal networks of care within pediatric healthcare and how co-design is applied to that, giving some examples of these applications. Finally, our last speaker of today is Ari Melamed Yekel. Ari is the Deputy Director, General Strategic Planner and General Manager at the HAL Innovation and the Helmsley Pediatric and Adolescent Rehabilitation Resource Center at the HAL Hospital in Jerusalem, in Israel. Ari is a senior high-tech executive with over 20 years of global experience and a proven record of leading teams to outstanding business results. He joined the HAL Hospital in 2019, and since then manages HAL Innovation, which is an innovation hub for the research, development, and commercialization of pediatric rehabilitation and assistive technologies, counting with 16 companies. In 2021, he established and now manages Allen Park, the Helmsley Pediatric Rehabilitation Research Center. Today, Ari will speak about the method of multiple stakeholders design partnership and what is expected from stakeholders. He will review their selection model for the design partnership program, as well as a typical flow of a project, and give some examples from current projects and tips for successful assimilation of a project within the health organization, which is in this case the Allen Hospital. At the end of this free presentation, there will be the question section where the speakers will answer to all your questions. Thank you. Gemma, you can start.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I will just get this full screen so it looks a bit neater. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you very much for having me today. I'm delighted to present, and I'm also delighted to go first because I'm also really looking forward to the other presentations in the session, so I'll be able to sit back and enjoy that. Yes, my name is Gemma Wheeler. I'm a project manager at the National Institute for Health and Care Research Health Tech Research Centre in Paediatrics and Child Health, which is probably the quickest I've ever said that new name. I'll explain a little bit more about what we do shortly. And our director, Paul Dimitri, is also in the audience, I can see, so no pressure, but it will be great to have him here as well in case there's any other questions related to the centre. So in my talk, I'm just going to give an overview of what we do at the HRC, talk a little bit about PPI co-design and experience-based co-design, because I realise there's a lot of crossover in the approaches, and that can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but within the main talk itself, I'll be focusing specifically on co-design, given that's the nature of this talk and this seminar today. I'll give a few examples of some tools in practice, but this is to give a bit of a broad overview of what we do rather than a specific project from start to finish. So if there's anything that particularly catches your eye or a project you'd like to learn more about, please do get in touch. I would be delighted to talk more in the Q&A or outside of the session. And I'll wrap up with a bit of a call to arms to hopefully keep this community going further. So just to begin,
Gemma, sorry, but I don't think your slides are changing.
Oh no, that's upsetting.
We're still on the first slide. I'm not sure if you've moved on, so I just thought I'd say now in case.
Thank you so much, Ursula. If I maybe take it off full screen, perhaps that will help. Please bear with me. Let's try again. How is that? Is that moving now? Fabulous. Okay, please excuse the toolbars at the top if you can see that. Thank you for jumping in there, actually, that's great. I think this happened in my interview for this job as well, actually, so I should know more about that. Fabulous, thank you. So just to touch briefly on the Health Tech Research Centre, so we are one of 14 centres across the UK, and we are funded by the National Institute for Health Research, and our main purpose in a nutshell is to bring together academia, industry, healthcare, and crucially patients and families to accelerate and promote research and innovation within the context of child health technology specifically. I believe we're the only paediatrics focused group, although a lot of the other centres have paediatric themes within their work streams. And our particular themes you can see summarised on the slide here. So from early life, long-term conditions in childhood, which covers a range of topics, including epilepsy, muscle and movement disorders, respiratory, sleep and ventilation, a lot within that. So you can visit our website to find out more. And the transition here relates to the transition from child health services to adult health services. We also have a few cross-cutting themes, again, that you can see here. So one looking at the mind-body integration, particularly looking at mental health and how that relates to physical health. Child health AI network, which obviously increasingly applies to more and more contexts and more themes. And particularly important related to today is our patient and public involvement and our focus on equality, diversity and inclusion, which again I will talk more on shortly. We were previously known as one of the MICs, so the NIHR Children and Young People MedTech Cooperative. We have recently transitioned into this new programme of work, so you may know us previously by that other name. And the themes that we're based on are very strongly related to the core 20+5 approach, which is clearly a big thing in NHS commissioning and a lot of the work that we do here in the UK at the moment. And although this isn't the focus of today's webinar, I just wanted to touch very briefly on health inequalities, because as I'm sure if you're at this session, you will understand the value of co-design and co-creation, but it is a really key way for us to start addressing some of these health inequalities and try and bridge that gap. As a snapshot, health inequalities relates to the unfair and avoidable differences in healthcare provision across the population. And specifically within the Sheffield, where we're based, there is kind of a famous statistic. It's from 2013, and unfortunately it's probably worse now, that there is one bus route across Sheffield. From the start of the bus route to the end of it, their life expectancy can reduce by 7.5 years for men or 10 years for women. And that isn't even from the most affluent to, the most deprived areas. That's just a snapshot. So it really just shows the impact this can have. And we believe that more research and innovation in this context can really help to address that. So big push here for collaborative and cooperative approaches, making sure that we're addressing the lesser heard voices, or sometimes called hard to reach groups, but that's very much related to the work that we put in, and we should be making that effort to reach groups. So within our centre, you may have seen the previous EPTRI webinar, which had our fabulous PPIE executive lead, Jennifer Preston. She is leading on this work, and I'm delighted to be supporting her and learning a lot from her in the process. Jen Preston has helped to set up the Generation R Young People's Advisory Group network, which is the YPAG network. They have centres across the UK, and crucially, they informed a really important piece of work with UNICEF, looking at the rights of the child. So within the PPIE work that we do here at the Health Tech Research Centre in Paediatric and Child Health, we are very much strongly focusing on this rights-based approach to PPI, so the rights of children to have a say in technology and research that affects them. Jen also touched on this in the last presentation, so I won't dwell on this too much. Perhaps it's available for rewatch, or if not, again, I'd be very happy to talk more about this later. We're drawing on the Professor Laura Lundy's model here that you can see summarised in this diagram on the right, looking at these 4 domains of what we mean by a rights-based approach. So the space in this diagram relates to providing a safe and inclusive space for children to express their views. So have children been actively sought? Is there a safe space for them to kind of talk about the issues that are important to them? And have steps been taken to ensure that all children can take part? So again, related to that health inequalities work. The voice relates to providing appropriate information and to facilitate children to express their views. So can they give an informed opinion about something? Do they know that they don't have to give an opinion? And have they been given a range of ways in which they might want to take part? The audience segment can sometimes be not looked at in as much detail, but this kind of relates to, is there a process for, okay, you've involved children, but have you communicated those views to people who have the power to make a difference and make a change? So that kind of relates to that aspect. And influence, obviously, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but have the children's voices and opinions kind of help to inform a change? And if so, what is that? How do you communicate that? And importantly, how do you feed that back? And another thing to kind of consider within this is that influence is bidirectional, and some of the work that we'll be doing moving forward, I think it's summarized here, is to start to create and pilot tools to, as well as measuring the impact on the research, which is obviously very important, but also the impact on children, young people and families that are involved, help them to self-reflect on their involvement, and also tell us honestly and safely what they think about that. How can we improve our approaches? And how can we monitor and track that so that we are accountable to making sure that we're involving children and young people and families meaningfully. There will be lots of information about this in the coming months about the work that we'll be doing in this area, particularly the HIT out workshops that you can see at the bottom there, looking at health inequalities. So if this is an area that you're interested in, I would really encourage you to sign up for our newsletters and do keep in touch. There's a link to do so at the end of this. So that's kind of a background of what we do. It's very much a whistle-stop tour, and hopefully our director in the audience is okay with how quickly I've had to cover this. But just to move on to the co-design elements of what we do here. So as I mentioned, co-design can sometimes be used as a bit of a buzzword. It can mean different things to different people. Different disciplines might use it differently. So I just wanted to kind of take a second to recognise that and to really highlight that PPI and co-design can be different things. Actually, myself, our director Paul Dimitri, and Ursula, who will be speaking after me, as well as some of our colleagues, we co-authored a paper about this in a special issue of the Journal of Medical Engineering and Technology, which goes into this in a lot more detail than I have time for today. So if that's interesting, please do follow that QR code, or I can send a link afterwards. It's not to say that this is a definitive framework and this is the way that we must do things, but I think it's important to have something out there that we can talk around. And when we put this paper out, it's very much a call for, let's start a discussion around this, let's compare experiences. So I would really encourage that in the Q&A session today and moving forward as well. So when I say PPI, this can relate to contributing to how research studies are designed, conducted and disseminated, and we really encourage that to happen as early as possible. Whereas co-design can relate more to people coming together in a design process. It can be characterized by the use of creative methods, and compared to more structured approaches like experience-based co-design that you can see here, co-design can be a bit more adaptable to different contexts. It's kind of characterized by that. And because of that, some people would say that co-design is when a designer is involved, others don't. It's kind of tricky. Because of that adaptability and that reliance on kind of a design-led nature, it can sometimes be more expensive. So there's all kinds of things to be considering in what kind of approaches you want to take. This isn't to say that one is better than the other, it's just different contexts and different situations require different approaches. And I think it's just having an awareness of that and a reflective nature around that. The experience-based co-design that I've mentioned here as well, it has more of a track record in healthcare. So it's come from a healthcare background, looking at design approaches and adapting it to what is more kind of familiar in a healthcare context. So it's more repeatable and structured compared to co-design. There's some excellent examples out there from the King's Fund and all sorts. So again, if you're interested in these differences and nuances and approaches, please do look at that paper. But essentially today we're really interested in what is meaningful involvement of children and people, and how do we do that in the real world, not just in these papers when we're kind of structuring it and making it look quite formal. So just to kind of touch on what we mean by co-design, myself and Ursula, we come from a design background who we've then come into healthcare. So that's kind of the angle that this is from. But again, people from healthcare can come to this, and it's not to say one is better than the other. But looking at the design approach, traditionally design was, a designer knows best. They might learn a little bit about the user from a researcher, but essentially it was designers do it and you get what you're given. But as the civil rights movements from kind of the 60s and 70s started to spread across the world, we start to see a shift from a closing of the gap between designers and users, from user-centered design to human-centered design. And the difference there is how involved or not are the users in this, and who do we consider a user? Certainly in healthcare, a user could be the patient, it could be the nurse delivering it, it could be a parent, a grandparent, teacher, all sorts. And I think Ursula's going to do some excellent talking about that later, this network of care that is really important to consider. And designers have also started working in more complex and more socially oriented contexts, which is why we start seeing stuff kind of being used in healthcare and starting to get the attention of healthcare services. So why should we take a participatory approach? Why should we use co-design? The two arguments that I tend to make are that there's two strands. There's the practical element. So there is just evidence that leads to better outcomes, more sustainable outcomes, more useful technology. But also the political element, or the ethical element, if you like, is that, as we've said earlier, patients, including children, including young children, and we can touch on that later, they have a right to be involved in decisions and research that affects them. The co-design approach is really important for considering patients as people and not symptoms. So people that have their own needs, goals, desires. It's not just about reducing symptoms or increasing opportunities. That's an element of it, but it needs to fit within a wider life world, essentially. And a key thing of what we do in the Health Tech Research Centre that I'm involved in is helping to remind people that children aren't little adults. It's not enough to take adult technology and make it small. Children have their own needs. They don't sit still. They don't run in straight lines. They want to get dirty and muddy and, be, spontaneous in the way that they live their life. And there's lots of important things that is kind of parallel to their healthcare needs that means they can live a fulfilling life and achieve what they're wanting to achieve. The co-design approach is also important because it can help us to make sense of the complex systems that healthcare operates in, and also address the power dynamics. So not just with doctors and patients, but adults and children, different disciplines, all these different things. It's important to think of creative ways to address that. So when I say creative, it's not just colouring in for the sake of it because we can take nice pictures and it looks great in the journals. There's a lot of theory behind this and this idea of different types of knowledge. It's kind of addressed, apologies, this image doesn't come out very clearly, but if we think about the different kinds of knowledge that we want to use when we're designing technology, we can look at the explicit knowledge, so what people can tell you, observative, if you watch someone do something, you'll learn a bit about how they do it, but also these deeper levels, so the tacit knowledge, things that are embodied, things that we know but are hard to verbalize. So a good example is if I ask you, how do you make a cup of tea, taking the very British example here, You might tell me a certain way of doing it, but if I watch you, I might see that you're struggling to lift the kettle. I might see that you accidentally put too much milk in and you're not happy with it, but you may do. All these things that are important to understand when we're thinking about the tools that help us engage with the world around us. And I think some of my colleagues will be sharing some frameworks and some useful ways to address, co-design space. And like I say, that it's not easy to talk about co-design. It's quite a messy process often. It's very iterative, but a useful framework that can be helpful to kind of take a step into this world is the Double Diamond Framework from the Design Council. It has just celebrated its 20th birthday, I think, so it is quite an old framework now, but conceptually it's quite useful. And essentially, I just want to draw attention to these cycles of kind of divergence. So when from divergent thinking, so kind of exploring things, to convergent thinking, kind of consolidating thoughts. So what I mean by that is beyond thinking about a design process is getting from a problem to a solution. It's understanding that we want to understand the problem space first. So we might have an idea or something, and we might then want to divergent thinking to explore that problem space. And I'll show some tools to explain what I mean by this shortly. And then convergent thinking in terms of consolidating what you've learned, listing themes, prioritizing what's important to take forwards. So we might do that, like I say, to get from a challenge to a problem space, and then again from a problem space to a solution, and then we might keep repeating that until we get to something that is really useful. So when I say divergent thinking, if we think about that first triangle, it might be about really exploring what is this space like, and what is the space like from different perspectives. We might want to immerse ourselves in the space if that's appropriate, or we might want to use visuals and talk to people that use that space to help support that. Hey, is that my 5-minute warning?
Yeah.
Roberta, lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's perfect. So we use a lot of visuals in the work that we do to either annotate it or use it as a talking point, or we might use visuals in terms of diagrams, and that could be helpful for mapping different people that are involved in a space or in a service. So here you can see a bit of work that we did about diabetes, thinking about the different people that are involved. And I won't talk too much about this because this is very related to Ursula's work, but also different areas of the person's life. So we don't go to school every day. Sometimes we go on holiday. Sometimes we want to have a sleepover with our friends. There's lots of ways of thinking about that. So whilst we might use tools like this to work with adults, there's ways of addressing it to work with children and young people. Here we've used illustrations, and this is probably a good example of a way that we approach a lot of our activities of working with children and young people, in that we try to focus activities that focus on taking a very positive approach, so very asset-based, plenty of opportunity for self-expression. Children like to tell you about who they are, what they're interested in, what they want to do, and activities that slowly build on each other and make sense. Lots of quick wins. So here is a good example of a project with looking at pediatric incontinence. We asked them to think about these different areas in their world, draw a happy face or a sad face if they like that bit or they don't like that bit, and then use these post-its to tell us more. So why is that? Why is that difficult? Or why do you enjoy that? And then from that, we could pull out the challenges and talk about, is that related to your naughty bladder, or however you want to talk about it? And that would give us some really useful insights to take into the next activity. So there's lots of ways of asking these questions, in not just what's difficult about your incontinence. It's much more, how does it relate to your world, and also what works well for you, what doesn't. We might think about the world that children live in and in families, but sometimes we'll use service journey timelines, and we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but again, there's lots of ways of doing this. The image on the left is a board game that we made to help children with narcolepsy talk us about a general day in school, what powers them up, what are their energy levels like at different times, that sort of thing. And also breaking down journeys into what happens, what are your emotions at these different stages, and what are the challenges related to that. So where you've got a sad emotion, what is the challenge that's causing that? So that way of structured reflection and thinking about that. We also use visuals to help think about personas. This sometimes relates to the health inequalities work that we mentioned earlier, but also can provide a way for children to share information on a character's behalf. So if there's quite a sensitive topic, they might like to say, oh, I think Lucy would like this, rather than I would like this. So we think of ways to help children express themselves in that way as well. So all of those are related to discover, so divergent thinking, but a lot of them can be useful for convergent thinking as well. So again, these personas, we can think about how are different people affected, who is affected most, that way of kind of prioritizing what's important. We could also do some mapping, so mapping ideas and problems against different factors. So here we use impact and effort. So what has the highest, if we solve this, what would have the biggest impact for the more or less effort, that sort of thing. Again, making it visual, again, making it a shared resource that people can work on together and work on collaboratively. And again, so like I say, we don't have a huge amount of time today, but we can keep iterating these divergent and convergent thinking, either from understanding the problem space or kind of defining the problem. We do a lot of creative idea generation. When we do this, it's very much about quantity rather than quality. In that first instance, getting lots of fun ideas out, lots of creative warm-ups, and using voting to help us prioritize those ideas and develop them forward, or using visuals to get more input, making kind of tangible prototypes and things like that to help engage different types of knowledge. So engaging with it in a bodily way, in a context. You can see here in a GP surgery. That's actually Ursula's boss that you can see there. So I think Ursula was involved in that project. And lots of ways of keeping those cycles of divergent and convergent thinking. So I will just wrap up because I realise I'm at time now. We share lots of projects like this, also on our website, on our LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff, but crucially at our conference. This hasn't been formally announced yet, so this is a bit of a preview, but our next conference will be in June next year. And we would love to invite all of you to come along, to share your experiences and just keep learning about co-design and creative methods together. So please do get involved, and I look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma, for your inspiring presentation. Now I leave the floor to Ursula. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, just having a bit of an issue actually seeing my own slides. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So thanks for that presentation, Gemma. I think I will be talking about some similar stuff. So hopefully that will follow on nicely. So I'll be talking kind of specifically about co-design and how I use that within my work to create pediatric technologies to support condition management and the kind of more informal networks of care. So first, I'll just give a brief overview of my background and kind of how I've come into the space, followed by a dive into some of the projects I've undertaken, where the co-design was used, and kind of some challenges that I encountered along the way and how I kind of overcame those or how co-design was used to help those aspects. So hopefully it will leave you with some useful insights that then you can take forward in your own work. So a bit of a background about myself. I work as part of Lab for Living at Sheffield Hallam University. We are a design-led interdisciplinary research group working together to address real-world issues that impact on health and well-being. So as part of this group, I'm a design researcher with a product design background. And so a lot of my research focuses on developing pediatric assistive products to help improve children's condition management. So this can vary from physical devices that target a specific symptom to resource packs that help improve understanding or self-management to redesigning service pathways within a hospital, say, to help improve outcomes. Within all of these outputs, co-design is at the heart of the project. I'm currently also undertaking a PhD, which is joint funded by Sheffield Hallam University and Sheffield Children's Hospital. I'm looking at how co-design technology can help support the more invisible aspects of pediatric long-term condition management. So through this and the case studies that I'll be talking through, co-design has been integral in enabling these solutions to be produced, solutions that effectively address the unmet needs of the population whilst remaining sensitive to their own context and kind of to the reality of their everyday life. So I'm particularly interested in the invisible aspects of their conditions and the role of these aspects as a supporting scaffold upon which effective condition management rests. By invisible aspects, I mean the more intangible parts of a condition, such as communication with your healthcare professional, dealing with the emotional burden or disbelief around your condition, or motivation to do physio exercises. These aspects are often crucial for how successful the condition management is, yet their importance can sometimes be underestimated or not necessarily considered, particularly when designing medical technologies or assistive devices. Allied to this is the informal stakeholder network that underpins condition management, the connectors, if you like, in the system that make the difference between success and difficulty. This can range from direct stakeholders, such as parents or teachers, to indirect, such as siblings or friends' families, as well as formal, so the multiple healthcare professionals that make up a multidisciplinary team, as well as informal, so friends or friends' families. Those stakeholders are similarly crucial, and an understanding of how someone's network is configured can impact directly on how they would use a technology that is designed for them, and kind of understanding that at the point of design can help make that technology more relevant to that user. So this was the focus of the first case study I'll be talking about. So the aim of this project was to develop technologies to help support specific unmet needs in children with arthritis. Whilst arthritis in adults is a commonly known occurrence, this condition is much less well known, despite the fact it affects around 15,000 children in the UK. It causes ongoing joint inflammation and pain and stiffness, making everyday activities difficult to achieve. A key aspect of this condition is its invisible and flare-up nature. One day, a child could be running around the playground, and the next on crutches due to a flare-up. Due to this, disbelief from stakeholders, such as teachers, is a common occurrence, negatively impacting the child's condition management. So there are multiple co-design inputs that informed this case study, which I've mapped onto the slide on the double diamond framework that Gemma mentioned earlier. So this ranged from unmet needs scoping to defining the needs to developing kind of the form and function, and finally in testing the prototypes. The co-design inputs include lived experience surveys, face-to-face co-design workshops, interviews with experts, activity packs, online make-together sessions because of a COVID impact, and evaluation interviews. No research project runs completely smoothly, and this was no different, encountering challenges along the way. So for the purposes of this presentation, I've picked out a few key areas in how co-design helped respond to these issues. So unmet needs scoping was the crucial first starting point. That tends to be how we start with most of our projects, kind of what Jen was saying about that divergent and convergent thinking, so at the discover part of the double diamond. So this was done through an online survey, enabling participants to answer in their own time, reducing potential pressure, and hopefully resulting in richer lived experience data. It also enabled us to access more international patients. So we had respondents from Europe as well as America, which was brilliant. And these results highlighted the huge lack of tools currently available for this population, as well as the competing priorities of the different stakeholder groups, leading to the first challenge, one that is often encountered in co-design, and that is a lack of consensus among the participants with what to pursue. So in this sense, or in this case rather, the child wanted something to help with the pain, the parent wanted something to help keep track of symptoms and appointments, whilst the healthcare professional wanted something to improve physio adherence, and the teacher wanted something to help them communicate better with their pupil around their pupil's needs. Designing for children's conditions is a unique area, as although the child is the one experiencing the symptoms, the adults around them are often the ones more in charge of managing them, obviously dependent on age, and that does shift kind of as they age up to 16. So the other adults important within the condition are their parent or teacher. Research into other self-management tools identified a tendency for designers to align a product with one stakeholder over another, or to compromise with less than satisfactory results. In contrast, I decided to progress all priorities forward into the co-designing phase. For this project, that made the most sense due to the nature of managing this condition, but that wouldn't always be the case, and it needs to be felt on a project-by-project basis. By addressing the main priority from each group, the stakeholders all felt validated in their contribution. This encouraged them to input on the other tools, which didn't appear to answer their particular need. So what began as 4 different tools addressing 4 separate priorities became a suite of tools that had benefited from insights and decisions from every group. In this way, the project demonstrates the value of working with varied and sometimes contradictory perspectives to develop stronger outcomes that answer multiple needs. This co-design approach shows how the differences between people's opinions can be used to challenge potential solutions and therefore create stronger design outcomes that take into account the whole life impact. So the next challenge was that the design of the products themselves took place during COVID lockdown, making it impossible to meet face-to-face. As a result, I used a mix of at-home activity packs and then creative making sessions online with children and their parents. The key concern was around bridging the virtual divide and ensuring the child remained engaged and focused, given at that time the majority of their learning was on Teams and there was a real kind of rejection of having to do everything online. Establishing trust and building a relationship with participants is a crucial first step in co-designing, as it empowers the participant to feel comfortable discussing what could be sensitive topics and feel that their voice is being listened to. I therefore sent out a day in the life activity. Gemma, I think, alluded to this in her presentation, so this was kind of the same idea, but in a slightly different format. So I asked the child and parent to chart their daily activities on the above map, telling me how they felt about them and writing why. This did two things. Firstly, it highlighted that I was interested in their whole life and didn't just see them as someone with a condition. And I wasn't just interested in that aspect. I was interested in their whole life and the different impacts. Secondly, it helped me get to know what they struggled with without having to focus purely on the negative. For example, one child put brushing their hair very low down as it hurt their arms, with physio similarly low as they found it boring. This meant I could then tailor the design session to their needs and get deeper insights to inform the product, as we'd already started with a kind of understanding of their life and where the prototype could input or help or what they'd want it to be. For the Make Together sessions, I sent out dumb versions of the prototypes along with pens, creative materials, and pipe cleaners to enable shared sense making and creating, the approach that would happen in a face-to-face workshop. The sessions then started off with a short icebreaker activity to help build up a level of trust between us, followed by remaking the prototypes into their ideal version. The interaction with the 3D allowed deeper insights to be unlocked as the child was empowered to think using the object, revealing key needs they may not have otherwise expressed. An example of this is one child's desire to add a face to each product, as you can see in the circle here. By digging deeper into this desire to humanize the product, it became clear that she wanted the device to be friendly and encouraging, with the face saying when she had done something well. In this way, the prototypes acted as establishing a knowledgeable starting point from which the child could then create their ideal device through using their natural imagination and creativity. Asking the child to physically draw on and design the device introduced a level of prioritization in a subtle way. The child will automatically add the things that are the most important to them first. This helps the designer to understand which elements should be prioritized, particularly if there needs to be a choice due to size constraints. For one prototype, 2 form options were included. The child was asked to interact with both to see which one they preferred. In all instances, the children chose quickly, but when asked why, they took longer to articulate their reasons. This highlights how the use of 3D objects in the co-design process can act as a way to verbalize difficult to articulate thoughts, acting as a springboard for a deeper discussion. Through continuing to interact with the chosen object, it became clear that the tactile texture enabled a stronger grip, and this is why it had been chosen. When co-designing tech, but particularly in pediatric tech, there is a continual balance of prioritizations, such as balancing the needs of the stakeholder against the size and weight of the device, that against the power it can supply or the length of time it can run. Children have a smaller anatomy, but the same strength of need. For example, in this project, the pain management device needed to be able to run all day, the same as it would for an adult, but it had to be half the size to ensure it was easy to use by the child. This leads to difficult decisions around which you should prioritize, whether that's the size of it, the tech, or the stakeholder need. And also, this is where the earlier establishment and understanding of a stakeholder's priorities becomes particularly useful. You know which way you need to angle it. In this instance, the device was producing heat, which uses up a lot of power very quickly. And therefore, to be able to be used at any time during the day, the battery had to be quite large. As a result, the prototype was much bigger than intended. In order to help balance this against the user needs, I reframed how the size of it was viewed and sent out pens with the device for children to decorate their own prior to testing them. This was incredibly well received, with the size of the device being seen as a positive, as there was more to draw on and more to decorate. Whilst this may seem superficial, it gave the child a sense of ownership of that device and highlighted their important role within the study, encouraging a deeper level of participation and making them feel excited around using the device as it was really theirs. It's important to remember that often these research projects are working to a constrained budget, and therefore it's an assessment of what is possible to match this stage of development in terms of matching priorities. In my example, the project was at a proof of concept stage, and that level of development was appropriate for that point. The next step will be to reduce the size and weight further and consider alternative solutions to this, a process that the children's opinions and input from using the prototypes in this project will be invaluable in informing. Co-designing tech is an iterative process and one of continual improvement. With this case study, 88% of users found one or more of the devices useful in helping with their condition management. This has led to the next stage of the project, which is a feasibility study which started earlier this year. The prototypes will be redesigned based on the experiences and feedback from the proof of concept study and further co-designed and retested to allow for further development. The approach to co-designing tech has been something I have also been exploring through my PhD, and as part of this, I'm in the process of developing tools to enable better co-design. One of these is exploring how you could use making and objects to map out the invisible and visible aspects of a child's condition, how you could visualize the invisible scaffold that sits behind the success of these visible aspects and that informal network of care or network of stakeholders. I used different types of acrylic in order to map this out, opaque white being the visible and transparent the invisible. This reflective sense-making activity untangled the different aspects. It revealed hidden needs, connections, and relationships. It emphasized how behind each visible aspect, like hospital appointments, there are a plethora of hidden actions, such as navigating appointment or procedural anxiety, keeping track of appointments, keeping track of the problems and symptoms leading up to the appointment, maximizing the time and the different stakeholders involved, such as siblings, parents, wider family, or friends, all of which impact on the success of that visible aspect. The next step is to evolve this into a mapping process to be used within a co-design session to draw out different perspectives, aspects, and stakeholders, with the understanding of this context then informing the design of technologies. In a similar vein, I had been overwhelmed by the amount of data from the GIA case study and struggling to find connections between the participants. I therefore decided to create a 3D tangible embodiment of the data as a method of both extrapolation and understanding, initially just for myself to sense make. Each colored thread represented a different participant's response to using the prototypes. Physically creating connections and overlaying different participant responses questioned convergence on a particular area or lack of connection in another. The threads transformed the data, bringing the data to life and becoming knowledge points in their own right, acting as ongoing points in analysis. The response from the participants after I had created this was hugely positive, as it translated what was otherwise meaningless numbers and confusing quotes to something they could interrogate and that they could understand. This highlights the power of creative approaches in equalizing knowledge and making it more accessible. It also shows the role of the designer in acting as a translator between stakeholders to progress concepts. So,
Ursula, 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So in conclusion, co-design is a powerful approach to ensure the development of meaningful pediatric interventions. So kind of a recap of what we covered. Consensus shouldn't necessarily be aimed for, it shouldn't necessarily be the aim for endpoint rather, but rather what works best for the project and enables a truly collaborative co-design process where all stakeholders feel equal contributors. Whilst COVID was a big impact on projects, it's shown other ways that co-design can take place, which may be more appropriate for some populations, such as those who are immunocompromised. It doesn't always need to be face-to-face, and this freedom in time and space could enable the inclusion of a wider group of participants. Balancing priorities, tech constraints, and financial constraints will always be a part of this process, but it's important to keep in mind what makes the most sense for the project at the time. The end goal may be a miniaturized version of the product, but that most likely won't be feasible in an early stage testing. So consider what it is you want to know and how it should be designed for testing to answer those questions. I hope that's given you an overview of how I've used co-design and some challenges that can occur. Please feel free to get in touch. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ursula, for your presentation. Is there any problem with the presentation? Or...
Hello, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, now yes.
I didn't hear you before, so
Okay, sorry.
now there was a problem, I think, with the communication. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to this webinar. My name is Ari Melamed-Yekel. I'm the Deputy Director General of Aline Hospital in Jerusalem. And my next talk will discuss multiple stakeholder design partnership. And I hope that, I think it's really well connected to the previous talk, and you'll see the connection during the coming presentation. So just short background about our hospital. Wow, hold on, something. Okay, so Aline Hospital exists for 90 years. For 90 years, we are the only pediatric rehabilitation hospital in Israel and the entire Middle East. And for the 90 years we exist, or a bit over 90 years, we focus on one thing, which is pediatric rehabilitation. We didn't do any pivot, we didn't change our purpose. We focus on only one thing, and that is our expertise. We see on a daily basis around 250 children a day with a variety of backgrounds, starting from congenital backgrounds and acquired backgrounds. We have overall experience of over 50,000 patients. We are a recognized advisor of the Israeli government on rehabilitation, on legislation related to rehabilitation, and regulation and standards. About 5 years ago, Aline Hospital decided to establish an innovation center. Decided to establish an innovation center that's called Ali Innovation, which is focused on development and commercialization of pediatric rehabilitation technologies. We are working on a method called multi-design partnership, and I want to define, or just to come to a common denominator, what does it mean, design partnership? So design partnership in this presentation, at least, it means that the vendor, the entrepreneur, the startup, works together with the customer. So the customer, we'll talk about who is the customer, but works together with the customer to develop a solution, to develop a product. Now, why it is needed? Very simple, because I think, like, as we presented at the beginning, I'm an engineer, and we engineers tend to develop amazing, innovative solutions for problems that barely exist. So to make sure that we are not creating an amazing solution from non-problem, we need to make sure, we need to understand very well what is a real problem and what is this. And there is no entity better than our hospital or rehabilitation hospital that understand the needs of the patient and understand the needs of the population in order to partner together with with the entrepreneur, with the startup to develop the solution. Now, it was very simple to talk about we as a customer, but it's not monolithic. Think about who is the customer. So is it the child? Yes, it is the child. Is it its parents? Yes, it's the parent. Is it the therapist in the hospital? Yes. Is it the clinician? Yes. Is it the educator? Yes. So there are so many entities or so many bodies, so many stakeholders that are together combining the entity. I call this in a simple way the customer. And in order to make sure that all these stakeholders work together in order to develop a solution, because if you develop a solution that the child will like, but the parents will not will not accept, the startup is doomed. If you develop a solution that the parent and the children like, but the therapist will not accept, the solution is doomed. So you need to make sure that everyone are working together in order to develop something that is accepted by everyone. Now, that's very, very complicated. You will have to wake up earlier in the morning in order to accomplish it. What we are doing in the hospital is we're working, as I said, with all the stakeholders along the product life cycle, which it starts with the need definition, and then the product design, and then testing and validation of the solution, and then assimilation within the hospital, and then they go to market and the commercialization. And that's a process that takes a few years, I would say like 3 to 5 years as the minimum. And we work with these entrepreneurs for this period in order to make sure that the product goes to the market and successful. Now, when I'm saying we work, it means the entire group of stakeholders work together, and we as a hospital provide them with services which we elaborate a bit later. Now, in terms of technology, it's less relevant what type of technology we deal with. So it can be just solutions that are based on Internet of Things or robotics or XR or wearables, whatever. The base of the most important component is just to make sure that the process is kept. So what do we provide? I said that we're providing services. So we do provide the co-development across products lifecycle. We do provide a service of product testing, validation, and feedback. We provide comprehensive clinical guidelines. We provide the ability to test it under research, like research management and testing and validation that is managed under ethical committee, under the Helsinki committee here in the hospital. We provide obviously access to the target population and laboratories, data, whatever is needed in order to develop the solution. What do we look for? So, like, you know, like it's an amazing service that we provide, and you can imagine that I would say in the last 4 years, I met over 200 startups and entrepreneurs that came to us and said, well, we want to partner with you. So what do we look for? We look for a strong solution to pediatric or rehab unmet need. We look for a strong team. We look for commercial agreement that we signed with that startup, so that doesn't come for free, in order to make sure that we are committed and we can devote the resources needed. In a way, we look at it as a venture capitalist firm looks at their investment. Why? Because we invest in these startups, we invest our assets. So if venture capitalists have funds to invest, we invest time and resources, and as a method, we look in very similar approach that a venture capitalist will look at the startups. So we will assess them on the need and the solution. We'll assess the business model. We'll assess the team. We have a structured model. You can see here an example of an Excel spreadsheet with a score, and each startup that we meet, we test them. We understand what is their status on each one of these subjects, and only if they pass the threshold, they will be accepted to the program. Now, it's not enough to say that we will work with them on the entire process of product development, because we found that it's very important that you touch in a specific flow. You go from milestone to milestone and go in a specific flow. Like if, generally we'll say, okay, there is a understanding the needs and creation of the MVP, of the minimum valuable product. Then you have a validation, you have a simulation, and you have commercialization. Now, the tendency of a startup will be, let's jump from the need. Why to go through validation? It's like, I'm sure that I develop an ideal product. So why should I go to validation? No, but if you will not go through validation, you will jump to commercialization, you'll fail. Why you do the validation and not, after doing the clinical trial, jump directly to commercialization? No, you'll fail, because if you will not do a simulation within the team, within the hospital, within the community that is part of that solution, you will fail. So it's only if you go step by step from one step to the other one, you will be successful. And in many cases, you go back. You start with developing a POC or an MVP. You try. You're starting a validation. You see that you have feedback. You go back and you continue to develop, and then you move again to validation, and you move forward to a simulation. So every step can bring you either to the next step or take you back to the previous step. That's the general method. That's the way we work. Today, as it was presented at the beginning, we are working in this method with 16 startups, 16 companies that are developing 18 products. Now, 16 companies, some of them are traditional technology, like a company that develops a headrest, or a company that develops a pediatric wheelchair. Now, what is unique or what is innovative in this pediatric wheelchair? The fact that it costs $100 because it addresses developing countries, and it can be affordable for people that live in an area where they cannot afford paying hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for a wheelchair. So the fact that you can buy a wheelchair that is sustainable, that is that can be active in almost any environmental circumstances, and it costs $100, it's very innovative. So it's like, that's a traditional technology. On the other hand, you can find companies that are machine vision companies, where you are using like a 2D camera, understanding the skeleton, and using that 2D camera, you can compare two video sources, the one that comes from your computer camera and the other one that comes from a recorded video, and you can give a feedback to the patient while he is doing physiotherapy remotely, without having a therapist near him, because the feedback comes from the software. The software understands his body, understands his movement, compare it to the model, and delivers feedback. So, on one hand, you have cutting edge machine vision. On the other hand, traditional technologies. Both of these examples will run under the same process of design partnership, because the same methods applies on each one of these products. Now, another example can be, or there's some of the products that came out of an unmet need that was developed by our PIs, our principal investigators in our research center. So example in case is a wheelchair, power wheelchair simulator. In Israel, up to a few years ago, you had to be at the age, I believe, 6, when you got the support from the state to acquire a power wheelchair. Like the state gave you a power wheelchair when you arrived to the age of 6. Why? Because at that stage you could provide, or you could prove that you have the proficiency to drive a power wheelchair. Now think about driving a power wheelchair. What it requires: proficiency of using a joystick. Children today using a joystick are using joysticks when they're 3 years old on their video games. So why should they wait until they're 6 years old? No good reason. But if you have to wait until you're 6 years old, you're starting to suffer from developmental challenges because you're not moving, you're not discovering the world. So what we did is, after proving the after having a research that shows that the proficiency you gain while you're using a simulator is equivalent to the proficiency that you gain while using a real power wheelchair, we proved it, and then we took the model, we built a simulator. With that simulator that we built, we went to another company, and the company today is delivering, or actually is about to launch, a product to the market where every child anywhere can download the simulator and train on how to use a power wheelchair. So again, that's another example. As I said, we have 16 startups that we work with that are developing 18 products. So,
sorry, Ari, 5 minutes left. Thank you.
Perfect. So, why the company? My presentation is we're afraid of you, so it jumps every time to the next slide. Most critical part is the assimilation. Assimilation, if you develop a product and then it's not used, it's I would say it's a waste. It's more than a waste. There are so many efforts that happen and nothing. You didn't get any reward out of it. So what we learned during the 5 years that we work in this method is, one, very important, is to have a customer-centric approach. Meaning you, the startup, have to understand that the patients, your therapists are the customer. They're not your partners, they're your customer. You must serve them, you must understand that you should be there in order to be successful. And if the startup is not ready to take that extra mile to understand that he has to treat each one of the stakeholders as his customer, he will not be successful. Then you have to set upfront measurable KPIs. You go entering into a project of that design partnership between the health organization, between the hospital, and the startup, you have to know exactly what you're going to measure and understand where do you stand. If you don't do that, yeah, you're not going to be successful. You have to have a champion. You must have someone inside the organization that really needs the solution. Without having that kind of champion within the organization, within the health organization, within the hospital, within the therapist team, you can come with an amazing solution, but it will not catch up. You have to understand that the health professionals, they're very busy. So for them to learn new technologies, for them to learn and to be trained is something, I would say, quite boring, and not boring, but they don't have the time for it. So you have to make sure that you're flexible in your ability to train. You have to repeat it and again and again and again, and do it online and do localization and just to make sure that they get it and they have it. And the fact that it's not that they're not proficient, it's just they don't have enough time, and their first priority will be their patients and not your technology. Last but not least is the availability of technical support. In many cases, and I heard it from my colleagues in other hospitals, what makes or breaks the situation is the fact whether you have a technical support that will support the clinicians, or you won't have that. If you have a technical support on your team, and in my team, my team is not the IT team of the hospital, but in my team, within the innovation system of Alim, I have a tech person that his role is to deliver technical support to the clinicians, to the therapist. And so they know that this work, that they're not afraid of absorbing new technology. So that's it. I would say that my 2 cents is that you have to act success-oriented. So you work as you will be 100% successful, but fall fast. So if you see that something doesn't work, kill it very fast. Otherwise, you're wasting time. And always think agile. Thinking agile means don't start to develop a very, very, very long method that will take you 2.5 years until you build your first prototype. No, build the first one, make sure that it is working, and then add additional features, additional components. Otherwise, you will build the solution for a problem that doesn't exist in 3 years from now because somebody else solved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you all for your inspiring presentations. Now we have time for questions.
I have a question. Tamar
Yes.
Weiss, I have a question if it's possible.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank all 3 speakers. I thought it was a really very interesting and well-coordinated webinar. So thank you all. I'd like to ask a little bit about whether you feel the need to distinguish between levels of technology when you are using design partnerships. As we all know, there are some technologies that are more difficult, technically complex, and perhaps not even ready for prime time than other ones. Like, for example, some of the robotics technologies are in that category, whereas other technologies are more ready for use already. And I'm just wondering how you handle deciding whether a technology is suitable in its current state for design partnerships, and if not, then how do you continue to work with your partners on such technologies? That was directed at any of the speakers.
Okay, Tamar, I can answer you. How do we do that in Alim? I think I assume that many of the other institutions are doing the same, but at least we at Alim, I'm looking at the company and I will try to assess the amount of R versus D in their R&D plan. So the more they have R in their plan, the higher the risk that we have to take, or that the health organization takes in establishing the design partnership agreement. And the more they have D in their R&D team or in their R&D plan, the less risk we have. So I will assess how much are there, how much D there, and then by assessing that component, how I will take a decision if we will go or not.
Thank you.
It's really interesting. I think from our point of view, it's quite an interesting one because we'll have people coming to us from different groups as well. So not just from SMEs and startups, but also from clinicians who've had a really good idea and something that works on the ward, and families and all sorts. So I think for us, it's really, we don't really put a limit on when we might start engaging with children and young people and families. We kind of encourage it as soon as possible. It might just be that the way that we frame the technology might be different depending on how resolved it is. So we might talk about it in terms of the impact it might address, or we might bring a prototype or something that isn't too refined, and it would encourage them to make changes. A bit like Ursula with yours, you had like kind of more rougher models to encourage people to explain how they would use it, which in turn would inform how it's formed and all this kind of stuff. So I think we wouldn't put a limit on it. The big thing that we would maybe push for is to make sure that it's driven by the unmet need, not a technology push. It's a clinical need pull, if that makes sense. So that might be the thing that we would stipulate.
I think my approach is kind of quite similar, perhaps more to Gemma's, in the sense of from that kind of design, kind of that unmet need from the very beginning is the majority of the projects that I'm kind of involved in. So it's sort of, can you embed that co-design from an early stage? And then the majority that we progress are kind of to a proof of concept level. And then at that point, you would want to kind of maintain the co-design aspects, but it's similar. There's less of a, it's interesting because I've never really thought of it from that kind of perspective before in terms of putting those kind of boundaries on it. But I think my experience tends to be more in kind of the earlier stage and how you can let the young people engage in a meaningful way.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much to all the speakers. I really enjoyed, excuse me, really enjoyed the webinars. My question's really to Ari with engaging with companies. And it relates back to really Gemma's talk about, bridging the digital divide and to serve the marginalized communities with technology. So those that are effectively hard to reach, those underserved populations. One of the areas that we are asked to focus on is what's called the minimum digital living standard. In other words, taking a technology that is viable for all populations at its minimum level. How easy is it to persuade companies to scale back on their technology to reach a greater number of people within those underserved or marginalized populations?
I can tell you that I'm just out of 2 hours ago, I had a discussion with one of our startups, which was around the ability to translate, to localize. So it's to localize to a language which is not very common. I would say that the amount of users that they will gain in order by localization to that language will, I'm not sure if it will justify the investment. And I think that once they understand that the policy of the health organization is to look at their patient as their patient population as a whole, they also understand that they cannot just cherry pick the benefit that we give them. They will have, either they will accept our approach that says you have to serve also the underserved population, or here's the highway, go with someone else. And that's I know it sounds very, I would say maybe not polite approach, but it works.
No, I think your direct approach is really important, because actually I think companies do have to accept that their technology might be limited to a select number of people. And I think it is, they've either got to change, or they've got to accept that their technology will not be adopted. Roberta, can I ask another question, please, if that's okay?
Yes.
Questions to Gemma, which is really around ethnic minority groups in the co-design process, and particularly where English is not their first language. How do you manage that within a co-design and co-development session to ensure that we reach the greatest number of people within ethnic minority populations as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and probably one that it's really close to my heart at the minute. I think some of the kind of top tips that we've been saying to other groups about this space is the importance of kind of a champion in that community. So to take some examples of some work that's happening in Sheffield at the minute, I was recently involved in a project with a sister group like ours, also based in Sheffield, but focusing on adults. who have been working with the Somali community, and they have a really strong Somali community centre here in Sheffield, and it's very much about time and money, unfortunately. So, you know, putting in the time and the resource to show that you're serious, and putting in the time to work with them to understand how can this benefit you and the people that you work with. So it's not just about us parachuting in, taking the data and then leaving. It's putting in the time to build those trusted relationships and understand how we can adapt it. So we might have some ideas about how we might adapt a co-design process to make it work for them, but also putting in that legwork at the start with those community leaders to understand how can we do that properly. So some good examples are elements like the workshops that we did with the centre. One of the activities that we wanted to do was kind of assessing how did you find this workshop. So it was about mapping the impact of the project on them and the community. And with us in mind, we were thinking, right, we'll do some scales. The left-hand side is 0, the rightmost side is 10. That works for us, for our, you know, English dominant way of writing and speaking. But a lot of the people in the group will be speaking Arabic and reading from right to left, or, you know, in that sort of thing. So little elements like that can really impact how people can talk about it. So it's a simple switch, but instead of going left to right, we were doing top to bottom in those scales. It's a really small thing, but putting in the time to adapt those methods, and also being very culturally sensitive. So, you know, the community leaders advised us that it would be more beneficial if we engaged the women and the men separately. We did that. We put in time and, well, they put in time and funding for some of the leaders to help with translating. So adapting the activities. So there was time for me to ask a question, it to be translated. And rather than asking questions and having to translate every answer, it would be a case of translating an activity, and it's something that is visual, it's on the table, it's shared. It's more about moving these topics around, and people can engage in their own time. So even if English isn't their first language, they've got that time and space to engage with it on their terms. And the translator can help us with kind of making sense of that a little bit later. So there's lots of things that we can do, but I think having kind of linking with the communities and thinking really properly about reciprocity. There is some guidance on our National Institute for Health Research website for the UK, thinking about payment and things like that, but it's not just about money and travel, you know. There's lots of ways to think about reciprocity. So I could talk for ages about this, sorry, but yeah, just a few things that have worked for us.
That's really helpful. And just one follow-up question there. How do you then go about assessing the impact of what you've done in terms of their meaningful involvement? Because there's some fantastic tips there. I never thought about the up to down or left to right, or those are quite obvious when you say them, but not something we naturally think about. So in terms of your involvement, how do you assess the impact after to either make improvement or just to understand that you have meaningfully engaged with that community?
Yeah, there's probably a few areas to map impact, and I think that's what's really exciting about the work that we'll be doing in the HRC, is really formalizing those different areas and helping other people to think about that. So I think there's impact on the individuals, and certainly for the community leaders that we're working with, they've gone on to set up new projects, and they are having they are research associates in the new projects. They're not just, you know, giving their time for free. So there's some kind of legacy impacts, I guess, that you could see. There's kind of research literacy in the group, and also trust that they're wanting to do more research projects, that's kind of the proof is in the pudding kind of impact. So being invited back, I guess, is a good sign of impact. The rollout of the device that we were designing together, essentially, it was a cognitive assessment tool. The fact that there is measurable uptake of this, you know, there's a very quantitative element to that. It is being used kind of in the community. And then also the kind of spin out, I guess. So using that kind of model of engagement, the team at the other hospital, and we're still being involved, luckily. They're kind of rolling that out to some other centres. So they're looking at, is this a useful approach we have a very big Chinese community here in Sheffield as well as South Asian. So we have a model, but also part of that model is the approach for adapting it, which is that legwork, putting in the time and the stuff. So I guess you could measure, you know, spin out projects, continued involvement with that same community, you know, in a meaningful way, impact on the project, and then, you know, that scope, ideas for projects are coming from that community as well now. A few different ways to measure that.
Great, thanks, Gemma. Thank you.
Is there any other question? Otherwise, I have a question for Ursula. Ursula, in your experience, do you think that healthcare professionals can collaborate with patients and their families or other stakeholders within the informal network to co-design new solution, and in which ways they can be engaged?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, definitely they can be, because I mean they're kind of, particularly within kids condition management, they're a key pillar within that approach. Particularly children's conditions where there's a multidisciplinary team, you find there's a lot of different healthcare professionals involved, and even just getting collaboration between the physiotherapist, the speech and language therapist, the kind of GP, all of those different people within it, as well as the parent and the child. Having all of those people in the same room, or not necessarily the same room, but being able to collaborate on and co-design is quite important, I think, in understanding that informal network of care and kind of making sure it's possible. In terms of how to do it, or how to kind of enable that collaboration a bit more, kind of going back to what was said in some of the other presentations around, healthcare professionals are incredibly strapped for time, and kind of there's this constant pressure. So I think being able to be a bit more agile and not just kind of face-to-face workshops, but allowing it to be online or an activity pack, or a kind of, we've done it before on a project where you had display in the hospital reception, and it was an interactive display, and as healthcare professionals were walking past to get their coffee, they can quickly add or leave their comment on a project. And in that way, it's still allowing that collaboration, but working, I think, within the constraints of their workload, and the pressure within that. And then as the designer, you take that, you translate it, and then you almost bring that in then when you work with the child and parent, if they can't all be in the same room. Obviously that would be the preference, but I think it's really being flexible and agile, and kind of aware of the different pressures the different stakeholders have, and working within that space.
Okay, thank you, Ursula. I have another curiosity. Gemma, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, it's okay. I just wondered if I could ask a question to Ari, if that's okay. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the presentation. It was really, really great. Thanks for sharing. Obviously, the groups that you work with get a lot from working with you, and I just wondered if there's any instances of the companies and groups that you're supporting learning from each other and kind of collaborating. Has this kind of created that space for shared learning and that kind of stuff? If there are any tips for supporting that?
Well, I would say we do have like a quarterly meetings that the startups are invited to. It's not a formal learning session, but they have just the venue to change and exchange ideas. What I didn't mention, and maybe it's important, and just adds to answer your question, is that we do work in many cases with geriatric hospitals in order to see if the startup can expand his solution to something that is going to also be interested to geriatric hospital. Now, why it is important? Because if you look at pediatric rehabilitation is relatively narrow market. And in many cases, the startup will say, okay, I cannot, as Paul asked earlier, like it's not profitable for us to develop a solution that is so focused on a small market. If you can look or try to understand if there is a secondary use or a bigger market, then it will make the startup more sustainable, more profitable. At the end of the day, more, I would say, more exist in the market. So yeah, we do have the venues to encourage information share, and we also have venues in order to create cooperations between hospitals, not only between startups.
Thank you. I think we have time for the last questions. Anyone? Otherwise, I have one. Okay, Gemma, I have a question for you. In your experience, how can organizations and policymakers actively support and promote the co-design?
Oh, is this an opportunity to ask for whatever, whatever I want would make our life easier? I think there's all sorts, really. I think working with groups that are doing this kind of collaborative process to develop kind of a shared language around kind of the benefits of doing this, really creating that culture of participation and innovation. It's kind of reflected in some instances related to kind of clinical trials and all this kind of stuff, but really, I think we need to be shouting about the amazing work that we do. Obviously, there's a lot of practical stuff that we could be supported with in terms of, time and space and money and funding, all that lovely stuff. But I think understanding the importance of this, not just in terms of number of products sold, but the importance in terms of young people achieving their potential, realizing their goals, having the same opportunities as their peers to engage in education and hobbies and sport, everything, really helping us to shout about the benefits of this and making a really clear link between people who are involved in research, really much better outcomes for everybody and our future, not just, the children now. This is investing in our future. So I think if we're all talking from that same kind of hymn sheet almost, I think that would be really, really helpful. Any support with recruitment as well, I think creating events like this, I think, is really helpful because there's lots of amazing work happening everywhere. And if we all know about each other, then that helps to kind of address a lot of the challenges that we have. Yeah, I think there's a lot we could do, but I'd like to invite Ursula and Ari to kind of answer that as well, because I'm sure you've got some good ideas, if that's okay.
Could you just repeat the first part of the question again, please?
Sorry, I think it was, what can organizations and policymakers do to kind of promote and support kind of co-design and this way of working?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sort of following on from what you've said and kind of having that kind of basis and sort of, I think the kind of that key translator or that key kind of community champion or connector, particularly I found at least within projects within hospitals, kind of within the condition you're working with, making a really good link with that team or kind of with a key clinician within that space can add a lot of weight to the project, I found, and kind of can build a lot of trust around it, just in kind of patients particularly in trusting you with their, I mean, it's quite sensitive, it's quite personal, their condition, in trusting you in talking about that and in feeling that it's going to be a meaningful collaboration rather than you're just extracting data from them and running away and they never hear anything again. So I think kind of making that as quite the crucial part of it and giving time for that in building that up before starting a project, putting in those links beforehand, working with charities as well, I think probably is quite a useful way of doing that and just embedding that from an early stage.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gemma, Ari, and Ursula. And thank you very much for participating in this fifth webinar. Please remember that our next webinar will be on child health and data and artificial intelligence, and will take place online the 25th of June. And so thank you again to all of you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Very nice presentation. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.